The pen stopped scratching in the next room the second my father said my name instead of my sister's. I heard it through the wall of our dining room, the way you hear your own death read out in a language you almost understand. Josephine, not Adeline. My father's voice didn't waver. It never did. Not for me. I set my grandmother's ledger down on the hall table, careful, the way I set down anything that mattered, and I walked in already knowing. 4 men in gray suits sat at our table like an audit team come to condemn the house. Renfrew Shipping owed Castellane Holdings $4,200,000 and had for 6 months, and the number had stopped being an abstraction the day the bank froze our accounts and started being the reason my mother wouldn't look at me. One of the men, older, silver at the temples, opened a leather folder and read from it the way a man reads a eulogy he didn't write. Miss, Castellane's office has proposed a resolution. Marriage to a daughter of the Renfrew line in exchange for full debt forgiveness and continued operational control. He paused. The contract specifies Josephine Renfrew, by name. The room went very quiet. My sister Adeline's fork stopped an inch from her mouth. She was 28 to my 26 and had spent her whole life being the daughter people looked at first, and for one full second she looked almost hurt not to have been chosen, before relief slid over her face like a coat put back on. By name, my mother repeated, as if the words might rearrange themselves into someone else's. Yes, ma'am. Miss Castellane was quite specific. Nobody in that room wondered why. That was the first thing I understood about my family, and the last thing I understood about myself. I had spent so many years being the daughter nobody wondered about, that even a summons addressed directly to me read, to them, as a clerical accident. My father exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath for 6 months, which he had. My mother reached across the table and patted my hand once, the way you'd pat a checkbook that had finally balanced. "You'll do this for the family," she said. It was not a question. It had never once, in 26 years, been a question. I thought about the ledger on the hall table, the one that had been my grandmother's, its spine cracked soft as cloth, its columns filled with her handwriting, and then, for the last 4 years, with mine. I had learned to read a business in its numbers before I'd learned to read a room. My grandmother used to say the columns always balance, eventually, even when you can't see how, and I had believed her the way you believe things people say to you kindly when you're small, and no one else is being kind at all. "What if I say no?" I said. It came out smaller than I wanted it to. "You won't," Adeline said, not unkindly, just factually, the way she said most things about me. "You're the ledger mouse, Josie. You do the responsible thing. You always have." I had done the books in secret for 3 years while my father took the credit in board meetings, had flagged an inventory fraud in our Marseille contracts 18 months ago, and watched him present my findings as his own, had learned the exact weight of being useful and invisible in the same breath. Ledger mouse. She'd called me that since we were girls, and every time it landed the same way, quiet and precise, a coin dropped down a well too deep to hear it hit bottom. "The signing is in 3 days, the silver-haired lawyer said, closing his folder. "Miss Castellane will meet the family then." She was explicit that Miss Josephine attend in person. Explicit, specific, by name. 3 small words that should have been a mercy and instead sat in my chest like a stone I didn't yet know I'd been asked to carry uphill. My mother was already talking about a dress. My father was already talking about the merger terms as though I were a clause in them, which I supposed I was. I picked the ledger back up off the hall table and held it against my ribs where no one could see it, and I did not cry, because ledger mice don't. And I went upstairs and counted the 3 days like a woman counting the rungs of a ladder she couldn't see the bottom of. The building on Prescott Avenue was 41 stories of black glass, and on the morning of the signing, it swallowed the winter light whole and gave nothing back. My mother had bought me a dress the color of a closed door. I wore my grandmother's ledger in my bag anyway, tucked against my ribs where the strap could hold it close, because some habits are just older than fear. The elevator opened onto a floor of hushed carpet and hushed people, and every one of them looked at me exactly once, cataloged me, and looked away. Plain, I could feel the word land on me before anyone said it, the way you feel rain start before you see a cloud. I had heard it my whole life in the specific silence people made when they compared me to Adeline, and I heard it now in the silence of Ren Castellane's staff, and it should not have surprised me, and it still found new skin on me to sting. She was already in the conference room when they brought us in, standing at the window with her back to the door, and the whole room organized itself around her stillness like iron filings around something magnetic. When she turned, I understood in one look why they called her the Vault. There was nothing performed in her face, no warmth offered up front to be spent later, just a level, assessing quiet, and eyes the gray of a sky before snow. "Miss Renfrew," she said, not a question either. Everyone in my life, it seemed, had stopped asking me things years ago. "Josephine," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which felt like the first honest thing that had happened all week. Something crossed her face at that, brief, gone before I could name it. She gestured to the chair across from her at the long table, and as I sat, a scent reached me I hadn't expected in a room this cold, black fur and struck copper, sharp and clean, and underneath it, faint. Something warmer she was clearly keeping banked down. Alphas didn't usually let civilians close enough to catch that second layer. I filed it away without knowing yet that I would spend months learning to read it like a second language. The contracts went around the table. My father signed with the flourish of a man being handed his life back. My mother signed smiling. When it came to me, my hand hovered a half-second too long over the line, and Ren Castellane's eyes flicked to my face, just once, unreadable. "You don't have to," she said. Quiet, only for me, though the room was full. 4 words. Nobody had offered me an exit door in 26 years, and this stranger with a cold reputation and a colder office had propped one open before the ink had even dried, in front of everyone who'd never once asked if I wanted to stay. I signed anyway. For my family, I told myself. It would be months before I understood I'd actually signed it for myself, because some part of me, some part that still believed the columns balanced eventually, had wanted to know why. The wedding was in 9 days. Nobody explained why the rush, and nobody in my family thought to ask. A merger closing was a merger closing to them, deadline-driven and impersonal, and I was the seal on it. I spent those 9 days packing a life that fit into 3 boxes and learning, without meaning to, the particular sound Ren Castellane's voice made when she said my name like it belonged to a person and not a line item. I first proved myself useful on day 4, in a boardroom I wasn't supposed to be in. I'd come to drop off a signed form and found myself standing at the back of a meeting where 12 executives were arguing over a shipping manifest discrepancy that had eaten $300,000 somewhere between Rotterdam and here, and nobody could find where. I looked at the numbers on the screen for exactly 4 seconds before I saw it, a duplicated invoice code buried 2 currency conversions deep, the kind of error that hides because everyone assumes the computer already checked it. "There," I said, before I'd decided to speak. Line 41. It's been billed twice, once under the old freight code and once under the reissued one. Same shipment, different names. The room went silent the particular way rooms go silent when something true and unwelcome has just been said by someone they hadn't planned on listening to. Wren Castellane, at the head of the table, did not look surprised. She looked, for one unguarded second, like a woman who had just watched a locked door open exactly where she'd expected it to. "Run it," she told her CFO. If she's right, I want to know who signed off on the reissue. She was right. It took 40 minutes to confirm what had taken me 4 seconds to see, and by the end of it, a junior finance director had gone very pale, and Wren Castellane had looked at me across the table with something that was not quite warmth yet, but was no longer just assessment either. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked afterward, in the hallway, when the others had gone. "My grandmother," I said. "She kept books for a fishing cooperative for 40 years. She used to say the columns always balance, eventually, even when it takes you a while to see how." Something moved behind her eyes, quick, gone before I could catch its shape. "Eventually," she repeated, like she was testing the word's weight. I like that better than most things people believe in. I didn't know yet that I'd just handed her a phrase she would carry for months like a stone in a pocket. I only knew that for the first time since the lawyers had said my name at that dinner table, someone had looked at me and seen the ledger mouse and not flinched. The estate on Callaway Ridge was not what I expected from a woman who wore black glass and cold copper like a second skin. It was old stone and ivy and a kitchen the size of our whole house on Marsh Street, and the housekeeper, a broad, warm woman named Mrs. Halloran, met me at the door with a look that catalogued me exactly the way the office staff had, plain, unremarkable, except that hers ended in a small nod, as if I'd passed some test I hadn't known I was taking. "She had the East Room made up for you," Mrs. Halloran said, leading me up a staircase wide enough for 4 of us abreast, not the guest wing, the family wing. I didn't understand the significance of that until later, when I learned no one but Wren had slept in the family wing since her mother died. At the time, I only understood that the room had a window facing the water and a shelf already half empty, waiting, as if someone had made room for a life that hadn't arrived yet. Dinner the first night was silent in a way that had texture to it, the particular silence of 2 people constructing sentences and discarding them. I ate slowly. I noticed she ate slower, watching me in small increments, as if I were a column of figures she was checking for an error she was sure was there and couldn't find. "You skipped lunch," she said finally, not a question, into the quiet. "I forgot," I admitted. I get like that when I'm reading something. The next evening, there was a plate of lemon shortbread on the sideboard that hadn't been there before. Small and plain and exactly, impossibly, my grandmother's recipe, the one I'd mentioned once, in passing, in the hallway after the manifest meeting, and never thought she'd registered at all. I didn't say anything. I ate 2 pieces and felt something in my chest crack quietly down the middle, the good kind of crack, the kind that lets light in rather than water out. "You remembered," I said finally, careful. "The way you handle something you're not sure is meant for you." She didn't look up from her tablet. "I remember things," she said, and something in the flatness of it told me this was not a small claim. It's mostly what I'm for. The staff at Castellane Holdings had their own opinions about me, and none of them bothered lowering their voices in the elevators. "Plain," they said, and worse, the merger's spare part, the woman the vault married, because a debt required a body, and any body would have done. I learned to hear it the way I'd learned to hear Adeline, a low hum under the day I didn't have the energy to argue with, but the numbers on my desk in the small office she'd given me kept not adding up in ways that had nothing to do with currency codes this time. A shipping subsidiary called Halcyon Freight folded quietly into Castellane's books 8 months ago, moving money in patterns that looked less like commerce and more like something being fed. I didn't say anything yet. I was still learning the shape of my welcome in that house, and some things, I was learning, you didn't hand over until you were sure of the hands receiving them. The wedding itself was small, 70 guests, a courthouse-adjacent chapel Wren's family had used for 3 generations, and it took 11 minutes start to finish, which felt about right for a merger dressed as a marriage. My father cried, the performance kind. My mother photographed everything. Adeline stood at the front in a dress nicer than mine and looked, for one unguarded moment, almost sorry. Wren wore black, of course, tailored close, and when she took my hands at the altar, her grip was steady and warm and entirely certain, and I realized with a small shock that mine was the handshaking, not hers. And that she'd noticed and hadn't said anything, only tightened her fingers slightly, an anchor offered without comment. "Do you take this woman?" the officiant said, and I watched Wren Castellane's face while she said yes, watched for the coldness the boardrooms had taught me to expect, and found instead something so carefully controlled it read, to anyone not looking as closely as I now was, as nothing at all. I said yes too. My voice didn't shake. I don't know where that steadiness came from, except that somewhere between the lemon shortbread and this altar, some part of me had stopped performing the wedding and started, quietly, dangerously, meaning it. The car ride back to Callaway Ridge was silent, her hand resting near mine on the seat between us, not touching, close enough that I could feel the warmth of it like a held breath. Black fur and copper filled the small space, and underneath it, that banked warmer note, stronger now than I'd caught it before, like something straining at a leash it had worn a long time. She walked me to the door of the East Room herself. Our room, now, I supposed, though neither of us had said the word. "I have something to tell you," she said at the threshold, and for the first time since I'd met her, Wren Castellane looked uncertain. It should have come before the vows. I was a coward about the order of things. My pulse did something complicated. "Tell me." She looked at the floor, then at me, like a woman stepping off something high. "The contract named you," she said. "Not your family. Not any Renfrew daughter available. You, specifically, I want you to know I chose that on purpose, before I explain why, because I don't want you thinking the reason makes the choosing smaller." "Why?" I said, and my voice came out barely above the sound of my own heartbeat. 4 years ago, she said, an anonymous memo came into my compliance office, unsigned. It flagged a fraud in a Marseille freight contract that would have cost us $11 million within the year if it had gone unnoticed. The handwriting on the margin notes was distinctive. Small, exact, underlined twice under anything that mattered. She reached into her jacket and drew out a folded, worn sheet of paper, softened at the creases from 4 years of handling. I kept it. I don't know why, at first. I told myself it was good analysis, and I liked keeping good analysis. It took me longer than I'd like to admit to understand I was keeping it because I wanted, someday, to meet whoever had written it. I stared at the paper. I recognized my own handwriting the way you recognize your own face in an old photograph, with a lurch, a doubling of time. "That was mine," I said. "My father presented it as his own work in a board meeting. I never told anyone it was me." "I know," she said. "It took my investigators 3 months to trace the margin notes to a name. When your father's shipping company defaulted on our debt and my board wanted collateral in the form of a marriage to stabilize the merger's optics, I had exactly one condition." Her jaw tightened, the only crack in an otherwise composed face. "I told them it had to be you, or there would be no marriage at all. I let your family believe it was arbitrary. I let you believe it too, because I didn't know how to say it without sounding like I'd bought a person off a shelf I'd been eyeing for 4 years, and I still don't know how to say it without sounding exactly like that." The hallway was very quiet. "Somewhere below us, Mrs. Halloran was banking the fire for the night, and I could hear the small domestic sounds of a house settling, and none of it touched the roaring in my ears. "You didn't marry a debt," I said slowly, working it out even as I said it. "You married a memo." "I married the woman who wrote it," Wren said. The debt was the excuse the world needed. It was never the reason. I didn't know what to do with 4 years of being invisible colliding, all at once, with the fact that somewhere in a locked drawer in a 41st floor office, a woman had kept my handwriting like a compass point. I reached for the folded paper, and she let me take it, and my hands were shaking again. And this time she noticed, and didn't anchor them, only waited. Careful, giving me room to be the one who moved first. "I don't know what to do with this," I admitted. "You don't have to do anything with it tonight," she said. "I'm not asking you to feel anything you don't already feel. I just didn't want our wedding night to start with a lie of omission sitting between us like a third person in the room. Is that all?" I said, half a laugh, half something closer to tears, or is there more you've been keeping in a drawer somewhere? Something in her face eased, just slightly, the ghost of amusement she rationed like everything else. "That's the whole ledger," she said. "For tonight." She didn't come into the room. She stood at the threshold a moment longer, close enough that I could smell the black fur and copper and, beneath it, that banked warm note flaring brighter than it had all day. And then she stepped back, deliberate, a woman choosing restraint over every instinct her body was clearly arguing against. "Sleep," she said. "There's no clock running on the rest of this." Not for me. She left, and I stood alone in the East Room holding 4 years of my own handwriting, and I understood, with the particular clarity that comes at 1 a.m. after a day too large for one heart, that I had married a stranger and been undone, in the space of 11 sentences, by the discovery that I had never been a stranger to her at all. I threw myself into Halcyon Freight after that, partly because the numbers wouldn't leave me alone, and partly because I needed somewhere to put the enormous, unmanageable feeling of having been seen. 3 weeks into the marriage, I had a spreadsheet of irregularities 40 rows long, and a growing certainty that someone inside Castellane Holdings was bleeding the company slowly enough that no single wound looked fatal. Priya Osei, Wren's chief operating officer, found me at my desk at 9 one night, surrounded by printouts, and said, not unkindly, "You know most spouses redecorate. You audit." "I like knowing where things are broken before they break," I said. She studied me a long moment, a gruff, assessing look I was coming to recognize as the closest thing Castellane Holdings had to a welcome. 15 years I've worked for that woman," Priya said. "I have never once seen her wait for anyone the way she's waiting for you. Don't waste it being polite about what you're finding in those books." I wasn't being polite. I was being careful, because the trail led toward a shell entity called Prescott Maritime Consulting, and the name Prescott kept surfacing in Wren's old case files in a context that had nothing to do with shipping and everything to do with a woman named Isolde Prescott, whom Wren had once, 4 years before the memo, been engaged to marry. I hadn't asked about her. Some silences you learn to read as locked doors, not empty rooms, and Wren's silence around that name had a particular density to it. I found out anyway, the way I found out everything, in the numbers, a pattern of withdrawals timed to board votes, invoices routed through consultancies that didn't exist outside a filing cabinet, and underneath all of it, unmistakably, in a boardroom memo template that used the same M- placement my ex-fiancé shaped hole in the story clearly still used, a signature ghosted just behind the shell company's paperwork. I didn't get to bring it to Wren before the heat hit. It came on fast and wrong, 3 days early, the suppressants failing under 6 weeks of stress, the way a bridge fails under a load it was never rated for. I felt it start in the middle of a sentence. a wrongness sliding under my skin like a fever with intent, and by the time I made it up the stairs of Calloway Ridge, my whole body had turned into a single, unbearable question. Wren found me on the floor of the East Room 40 minutes later, curled around my own knees, sweating through a shirt gone see-through, and I registered, distantly, mortified even in the fog of it, that the black fur and copper in the doorway had gone sharp and urgent, an alpha's scent responding to a call her body understood before her mind caught up. Josie. Her voice cracked on my name in a way I'd never heard it crack on anything. She didn't cross the threshold. Talk to me. Tell me what you need. Cold, I managed. Water, don't. The sentence dissolved. My skin felt like it belonged to someone starving. She brought ice water and cool cloths and knelt at a careful distance, close enough to help, far enough to leave a decision entirely mine, and every muscle in her body looked like a dam holding back a flood only she could see the size of. I could call for a beta nurse, she said, low, if you want someone whose scent won't make this worse. Stay, I said, before I could think better of it. Just stay. Don't touch unless I ask. I won't, she said. Tell me to stop and I will. Every single time. That's not a line I use, Josie. That's a promise. Hours blurred into a haze of cold cloths, and her low, steady voice reading shipping manifests aloud because I asked her to, absurdly. Because the sound of numbers in her mouth was the only thing that felt like solid ground. Somewhere near 3 a.m, my hand found hers on the mattress edge, an ask without words. And she laced her fingers through mine and nothing more, and held that single point of contact like it was the entire negotiation, complete and sufficient. Why won't you? I whispered, somewhere past 2 a.m, past reason, past most of my pride. You're my mate. It's our wedding week. Nobody would blame you. I would, she said simply. I don't want you the first time your body begs me to want you. I want you the day your mind does, with every suppressant working and every door unlocked and nothing forcing your hand. I've waited 4 years for a memo's handwriting. I can wait out one heat. I cried then, not from the fever, and she didn't ask why, only tightened her grip on my hand a fraction, an anchor and nothing more. All night, until dawn came up gray over the water, and the fever finally broke and left me hollowed out and for the first time in weeks, entirely certain. That answer should not have undone me the way it did, I told her, once I could speak in full sentences again. It did anyway. She almost smiled. Get some rest, she said. The columns can wait a day, even yours. We told each other everything the week after, in pieces, the way you hand over something breakable a shard at a time. I told her about Adeline, about the ledger mouse, about 18 months of watching my father wear my Marseille discovery like a medal he hadn't earned. She listened with her whole body still, in the particular way of someone unused to being handed anyone's unguarded truth and terrified of dropping it. She told me about Isolde Prescott in the low kitchen light one night, Mrs. Halloran long since gone to bed, a bottle of wine neither of us finished between us. My mother built this company on one rule, Wren said. Never let them see what you can't afford to lose. She learned it from my father, who left when Castellane Holdings nearly folded in its first bad year, walked out rather than watch it fail with his name on the door. I learned it from her, watching her run this company for 30 years without once crying where a camera could catch it. Her thumb traced a slow line around the rim of her glass. Isolde was supposed to be the exception. I let her close, told her things about the company nobody outside my mother knew. 2 months before our wedding, I found out she'd sold 3 of them to a competitor for a board seat she wanted more than she'd ever wanted me. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it with my whole chest. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, she said. I'm telling you because I need you to understand why I'm slow to hand things over, even now, even to you. And because Halcyon Freight's shell paperwork has her fingerprints on it, and I think you already know that, and I think you've been protecting me from having to hear it out loud. I hadn't realized how visible my carefulness had been. I found her signature style ghosted in the filing template 3 days ago, I admitted. I didn't know how to bring it to you. Bring me everything, she said, and reached across the table for my hand, unprompted this time, the first touch she'd initiated since the heat. Whatever it costs, I would rather lose the company than lose the version of myself that stopped hiding things from you. I laced my fingers through hers, warm this time instead of desperate, and for one full evening, in that low kitchen light, I let myself believe the worst chapters were behind us. The gala was Castelline Holdings' 100th anniversary, 400 guests in the Prescott Hotel ballroom, which I would later understand was not a coincidence at all. I wore green, the first color I'd chosen for myself since the wedding, and Wren's hand at the small of my back felt like something I'd been given permission to keep. Isolde Prescott found me by the bar 40 minutes in, elegant in ivory, her voice pitched low and sweet as poisoned honey. You must be the accountant, she said, like the word was something scraped off a shoe. I have to say, Wren's tastes have gotten remarkably practical in her old age. A discount bride for a discount problem. I did the math on your shell company, I said, before I decided to say it at all. 4 years of being underestimated, finally finding a target worth aiming at. Prescott Maritime Consulting. 11 wire transfers routed through 3 jurisdictions to obscure a single signature. Yours, I believe. Something flickered behind her composed face, there and gone. But I'd learned to read flickers the way I read balance sheets, and I knew I'd landed a hit. How droll, she said. The ledger mouse thinks she's found teeth. I didn't get the chance to answer. Security found me 20 minutes later at the edge of the ballroom. 2 officers, apologetic and firm, a folder in one hand with my name on it and the word fraud typed beneath it in a font too clean for anything true. Miss Renfrew Castellane, we need you to come with us. There's been an allegation of financial misconduct filed against you this evening. Falsified audit reports, embezzlement from a Renfrew shipping account. The room noticed the way rooms notice a spill. In ripples outward from the center, 400 guests turning to watch the ledger mouse get walked out under the same chandeliers, where 20 minutes earlier she'd worn green like she belonged there. I looked for Wren across the ballroom and found her already moving, already too far away. Her face gone to the flat, unreadable mask of the vault, and for one terrible hollowed second I thought, she's protecting the company. She's letting them take me to protect the optics. Wren, I said, my voice not carrying nearly as far as I needed it to. She didn't reach me before the doors closed. The last thing I saw was her face, white under the chandelier light. And it was not the face of a woman abandoning me. I understood that too late to matter, in the back of a car with my wrists unrestrained, but my dignity in pieces on the ballroom floor behind me, the accusation typed clean and false in a folder I hadn't been allowed to read past the first page. They held me 4 hours in a Castellane Holdings compliance office that smelled of nothing at all. No black fur, no copper, no warmth banked under anything, and I understood in that antiseptic room exactly how much I had come to rely on a scent I hadn't even known I was tracking until it was gone. My phone had been taken with my coat. I sat with my grandmother's ledger, the one physical thing they'd let me keep, and traced the cracked spine with my thumb and made myself breathe. The door opened at what I later learned was 2:47 in the morning, and it wasn't security. It was Wren, coat still on, tie loosened like she'd fought it, and behind her Priya Ose carrying a laptop like a weapon. "I need you to know something before you say a word to me," Ren said, crossing the room in 4 strides and going down on one knee in front of my chair. Not romantic, urgent. A woman closing a distance she couldn't stand one more second of. "I let them walk you out because Isolde had a second reporter planted in that ballroom, and I needed the accusation filed publicly and on record before I could tear it apart publicly and on record. If I'd stopped it in the room, it would have looked like I was protecting a guilty wife. I needed it filed. I needed 4 hours to build a case that can't be undone by tomorrow's headlines. I am sorrier than I have words for that it cost you tonight to get it. You should have told me," I said, and my voice broke on it. 4 hours of held breath, finally letting go. "I know," she said. "I chose the company's timeline over your fear. For 4 hours, and I will spend longer than that making it right. But I need you to hand me everything you found on Halcyon Freight and Prescott Maritime tonight, right now. Because I think we have exactly until the board meets at 9 to bury her before she buries you instead." I looked at her kneeling on the compliance office floor, black fur and copper flooding back into a room that had smelled of nothing for 4 hours, and I understood that the worst image of my life, the doors closing on my own wedding, had not been a betrayal after all. It had been a woman choosing the long game over the easy comfort, at a cost she clearly hated paying. I opened my bag and handed her the ledger. We worked until dawn at the kitchen table at Callaway Ridge, Priya's laptop between us, my grandmother's handwriting trained eyes finding the pattern faster than any forensic software Castellane Holdings owned. Isolde Prescott had routed $900,000 through Halcyon Freight over 8 months, using the merger chaos and my own family's debt collapse as cover, positioning herself to force a hostile board vote the moment the Renfrew marriage looked unstable enough to spook the shareholders. She had engineered the debt default herself, months before the lawyers ever came to my father's table, had, in effect, chosen me for Ren, before Ren ever got the chance to choose me honestly, then set fire to the choosing the instant it started working. "She wanted the company," Ren said at 4 a.m, staring at the spreadsheet like it might rearrange itself into an apology. "She always wanted the company. I used to think she wanted me. Maybe she wanted both," I said, and only knew how to reach for the one she could steal. At 9 that morning, in a boardroom with the same long table where I'd first spoken out of turn about a duplicated freight code, Ren Castellane laid the entire trail out for 11 executives and 2 members of the press her own team had invited, and let me be the one to walk the room through the numbers, line by line. Because she said, quietly, before we went in, "It should be your voice. It was always going to have to be your voice." Isolde Prescott's composure lasted exactly until slide 4, the wire transfer with her personal signature ghosted behind a shell company's letterhead, and then it didn't last at all. Security escorted her out through the same doors I'd been walked through 4 nights earlier, and this time it was her face white under the light, and I felt, watching her go, not triumph exactly, but something quieter and more durable, the particular relief of watching a column finally, undeniably, balance. "Don't," I said to Ren afterward, in the empty boardroom, when I saw the look on her face, the flat, cold calculation of a woman deciding how completely to destroy someone who'd once nearly broken her. "Let the fraud charges do it. Let the courts do it. Don't become the thing her doctrine made you almost be. Not for her. Not when you don't have to." Something in Ren's shoulders came down, an old weight setting itself gently on the floor instead of being carried 1 more mile. "You're right," she said. "I forget, sometimes, that mercy isn't the same as weakness. You keep reminding me. The columns balance," I said. "Eventually, you don't have to force the last entry yourself. She looked at me a long moment, and then she crossed the empty boardroom and kissed me for the first time since our wedding night, slow and certain, no restraint in it at all this time, only 4 years and one terrible night finally, fully spent. "I choose you," she said against my mouth, "not the memo, not the merger. You, awake, sober, every suppressant working, every door unlocked. I choose you. Ask me," I said breathless, "with your words." "Josephine Renfrew," she said, low, steady, the boardroom light gone gold with morning behind her, "will you let me claim you? Fully, tonight, nothing left in a drawer." "Yes," I said, and felt the yes land in my whole body like a column closing clean, no remainder. "Yes, ask me again in the doorway, so I can say it twice." She did. I said it twice. That night, at Callaway Ridge, with the East Room's window full of a low winter moon, she asked me one final time, mouth at the curve of my throat, restraint finally, gloriously spent, and I said yes for the third time, and the bite when it came was gentle and certain and changed something in the air of the room permanently. A scent settling into a single new signature. Black fur and copper threaded through with brown sugar and warm paper, ours now, indivisible. Through the fresh thread of the bond, I felt her feeling for the first time, whole and unguarded, not triumph, not relief, just a vast, quiet certainty. The sensation of a door that had been locked for 34 years finally standing open. The Renfrew family found out about the debt restructuring the same week the papers ran Isolde Prescott's indictment. Ren had rewritten the settlement quietly, weeks before, without telling me. The $4,200,000 stayed forgiven, but the operational control clause, buried in fine print my father had never bothered reading closely because he'd never bothered reading anything I flagged closely, transferred Renfrew Shipping's board authority to a trust in my name alone. My father called it theft. My mother called it ingratitude. Adeline, to her credit, called it fair, and said so to their faces at a dinner I wasn't there for, but heard about in careful, second-hand detail from a cousin who still spoke to me. "You could have let them keep it," I said to Ren, that week. Watching her sign the last of the paperwork. "They sold you for a debt without once asking what you wanted," she said. "I'm not interested in rewarding that with continuity. You get to decide what happens to that company now, not them." 6 months on, the harbor office on Ferris Street had a nameplate on the door that read Renfrew and Castellane Forensic Audit, small, plain, exactly the kind of unglamorous good work I dreamed about once, in passing, in a hallway, to a woman I hadn't yet understood was memorizing everything I said. Priya Osei sent our first client. Mrs. Holleran sent flowers on opening day and a note that said, simply about time. A year on, almost to the week of that first dinner where my father said my name like a line item, Ren knelt in the East Room, morning light coming gold and low across the floor, and opened a small box with a ring plain enough that I laughed, actually laughed, at how well she'd learned me. "This isn't the contract," she said. "This is the part where I get to ask you properly. Marry me again, Josie, not for a debt, not for optics. Because I want to spend the rest of my life proving 4 years of memo reading wasn't the beginning of loving you. It was just the first time I noticed." "Ledger Mouse," I said, through tears that didn't feel like the old ones at all, "says yes." She laughed, the sound still rare enough that I counted every one, and pulled me down into the gold light with her, and somewhere below us I heard Mrs. Halloran humming in the kitchen, and I thought, not for the first time, that the columns had, in fact, balanced, exactly as my grandmother promised, though it had taken a wedding, a heat, a fraud, and one furious, undone confession to get there. The ledger sits on the shelf in our library now, spine healed under new binding. No longer hidden in the bottom of a bag, but set out in the open where morning light finds it first. Ren's hand rests on my shoulder most mornings while I read it over coffee, and some part of me still marvels, quietly, at how a woman the world once called the vault turned out to be the safest place I have ever kept anything, including myself. I used to think being plain meant being unseen. I have learned, since, that it only ever meant no one had looked closely enough yet, and that the right person, when she finally does not see plain at all. She sees the whole ledger, every column, every entry, and chooses to stay for the sum of it. The end.